Good morning from my side. I wish a warm welcome to all of you who are interested in finance in EU project funds. My name is Maria Šolas-Pasić, and I will be moderator for all parallel sessions dedicated to Horizon Europe Finance as one of the topic of this meeting. Let me introduce myself in short here for those who don't know me yet. I work as project manager at University of Belgrade School of Electrical Engineering for more than 7 years. At the same time, I have worked as national contact point for financial and legal matters in FP7 and Horizon 2020 program in Serbia. I have professional experience in training beneficiaries on one side and practical experience in management and implementing vast number of research, innovation, higher education projects. As an economist, I was a proud leader, working group 2, dedicated to finance in one of the most prominent network researchers, managers, administrators, financed by EU. Probably it's well known, BESTPRAC. Also, I wish to introduce my colleague Joanna Roots from EARMA. She will support me in this moderator role during the 2 days meeting. Thank you, Joanna, in advance. And now, first of all, let's introduce the house rules. I hope that you can see it on the screen. The meeting is recorded. What it means that when you switch your cameras on, you might appear in recording. So you can choose to have your camera on or off. Use the chat function for asking questions, share information, comments. We will collect all your questions and, of course, give our best to provide answers during the meeting. Anyway, if left unanswered the questions, we will send them to whole WG2 after the meeting. Stick to the time suggested in agenda, 50 minutes for presentation and 5 minutes for discussion. Let's all try to stick this time schedule for the best organization of all our parallel sessions. Kindly note that the moderators will remind you of the time availability at least 2 minutes before your time is up. When there is a room for live discussion, please raise your hand. But to know that live discussion is planned for the very end of each session, except if we need additional clarification for your questions. In that case, some of us moderate. Okay, I have a great pleasure to introduce presenter for our first session, Per Inge Andersson. He is a senior advisor in financial and project management of European project and Norwegian University of Science and Technology. His experience comprises all EU framework programs since FP6, along with various other research funding programs. He has actively involved in EARMA since 2008. He was an active participant in BESTPRAC and remains engaged in follow-up activities in all European BESTPRAC network. In this session, he will speak on how to avoid pitfalls when budgeting for Horizon Europe, taking a look at the basic rules and principles that should be taken in account when budgeting for Horizon Europe proposals. Per Inge, floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Maria. When we're discussing budgeting proposals for Horizon Europe proposals, these are some of the issues I suggest we should take a look at. Briefly look at basic rules for budgeting, then just briefly show you what the budget looks like or the budget table looks like for Horizon Europe. Some changes moving from Horizon 2020 to Horizon Europe, and also looking at terminology that changes, cost categories that either have disappeared or have been added. Also, there are new additions to the budget table regarding income. A few highlights of changes in how you calculate your costs. suggestion on how you might approach developing your own budget tools for this new framework program. A few keywords about how you might go about budgeting proposals as a coordinator under Horizon Europe. A couple of highlights of things that, to me at least, seem unclear at the moment, looking at the present documents available from the Commission, and suggestions of where you might look for guidance, basically. So when you approach new proposals under Horizon Europe and you're going to work on a budget, basically you have to work with what you have in terms of guidelines. We all know that there is no annotated model grant agreement published yet. In the previous framework program, Horizon 2020, that document, as I remember, was about 850 pages. So that is where a lot of people went for guidance on financial rules. Obviously, the model grant agreement, the first version of which has been published, cannot go into detail about all kinds of financial questions that you might have when you work on budgeting and when you work on reporting. So we had to work on what we have. It's important to know the basic criteria for what makes costs low under the new framework program. There is Article 6 in the model grant agreement, which summarizes that from a legal point of view. We need to understand the terminology in Horizon Europe, which is relevant for budgeting, and also know what the cost categories are and which costs fit where in these categories. And as well, we need to know how to calculate costs. This, I mean, you're not supposed to or expected to study this. As you can see, the budget table in the model grant agreement for Horizon Europe is very wide. It has a lot of columns. This is not even readable, so it just tells us that there are a lot of cost categories available in the corporate model grant agreement. I have another presentation of this from the proposal template from one of the first calls that have already been out this year. This was from the EIC Pathfinder open call, which closed in last month. Again, we see a lot of category columns and categories going forward, and this also continues on the next page. And I'll summarize, have a few comments about these later on. Again, it might seem daunting to try to navigate this landscape with all those columns, all these categories, and so on. So we'll try to summarize things a little bit for you. But I put out the question mark here. It is said in the corporate model grant agreement that, okay, you have a budget table which is sort of supposed to apply to most programs, but of course there is a provision that some work programs may have their own budget tables, and indeed so far that's a fact. Already in the ERC calls that were open with deadlines in April, we could see that the budget table for the ERC proposals was roughly like for Horizon 2020. For MSCA, Marine Scholastic Reactions, no work program has been published yet, so we don't know exactly what the budget table would look like, but we can speculate that it would be to a large extent like for the previous framework program, but be prepared for modifications. So then, what are key changes when we move from one framework program to the next, from Horizon 2020 to Horizon Europe? There is some language that has changed, some terminology. something that was called one thing in Horizon 2020 is now called something else. Another thing is that cost categories that we had in the previous framework program, we cannot find them anymore. But new cost categories have been added, and we need to understand those. Third thing is that there are certain changes in how to calculate costs in those rules. So for terminology, I've tried to highlight changes in terminology, changes in what things are called that are relevant for budgeting. First of all, and this is when you budget your own budget as a beneficiary, but also working as a coordinator, what to keep track of for the whole consortium. One thing that has changed is the name of the cost category, other direct costs, which is now called purchase costs. It's basically just a name change. Also within that category, what used to be called other goods and services is now called other goods, works and services. Again, mostly a name change. Then the third change is a little bit more complicated. We had in Horizon 2020, the term in-kind contributions by third parties with different varieties. In Horizon Europe, that is different, and we'll go into greater detail about this later on in this meeting in a separate presentation. But briefly summarized here, we have in-kind contributions by third parties provided free of charge, which is what is now defined as in-kind contribution by third parties. Other contributions by third parties are not, which are provided against payment, are not called in-kind contributions anymore. A fourth change is the term linked third party, which is now renamed affiliated entity to bring the terminology for Horizon Europe in line with terminology in other EU programs. Similarly, what was called international partner in Horizon 2020 is now called associated partner. This is primarily relevant when you're a coordinator and you have to take care of the budget for the consortium as a whole. Then it's also important to know what are the roles of each legal entity that's involved in the project. About the cost categories that have gone and have been added. I've mentioned one cost category, which was present in the budget table and also in the financial statement template for Horizon 2020, which is called estimated cost of in-kind contributions not used on premises. Again, this is not the place to go into detail about that category. It was used in order to correct the calculation of indirect costs, basically. Beyond that, it is a subject of a different presentation. Then there are new cost categories in, well, all of them are not new, but they are all added to this corporate model grant agreement budget table under the heading other cost categories. And those that are marked in red on this table are available only in certain calls for certain work programs and not for all. So you won't see them, you won't see all of these cost categories under the heading other cost categories in the budget table for your proposal in the EU portal necessarily. But you may see them depending on the call, basically.
Peringa, I'm sorry, I have to interrupt you. You have 2 minutes more for presentation.
2 minutes?
Yes, please. And
yeah. So basically, another thing that's new in the budget table is that there are columns for income not just costs. Yeah, I'll just highlight those for you now. Changes in cost calculation rules. We'll have another presentation of personnel cost later on, so I'll skip that. But there are two highlights that we need to think about. It's the change from hourly rates to daily rates and the issue of project-based remuneration. For in-kind contributions by third parties, again, separate of a subject of a separate presentation, but the change here in cost calculation is that you add, now you add 25% for indirect costs on top of those costs, because you're supposed to only have direct costs to start with. For internal invoice goods and services, Wolfram is going to speak about that. For the cost calculation, the key here is that you will, indirect costs are supposed to be included in the unit cost for internal invoice goods and services. So no additional 25% for indirect costs for those costs anymore. I made a note here at the bottom of my presentation from the ERC calls this year. There was a budget tip saying that if you have costs from other parties, which are calculated on the unit cost basis and invoiced internally, you should put them under internal invoice goods and services, which was strange to me, but that's what it said. Equipment cost, again, subject of a different presentation, but keep in mind this option for costs of assets under construction and how to budget those. And then there's a change in the threshold for CFS, for certificate of financial statement.
Yeah, Peringi, we have to stop here. We have one question for you before the next session. This is a question from Madalena Tognola. Are the former contributions by third parties against the payment now included as works under other costs?
Basically, you have to include it in the cost category that fits the cost. If it's personnel, you could include in-kind contributions against payment under seconded persons. Other contributions, non-personnel, non-cash contributions against payment, you put them under the relevant purchase cost category.
Okay, thank you very much for all the priceless information and a brief overview of the changes. We will go in details further with everything what you mentioned during this presentation. We have to stop here and go forward in the same direction in how to avoid the pitfalls when budgeting Horizon Europe. But let me introduce our panelists and presenters for the next session. Wolfram Rieneck is Deputy Head of the Research Support Department at Medical University Innsbruck, Austria. There he is responsible for international funding programs as well as programs funding cooperation project between university and industry. He started supporting applicants for European framework programs 23 years ago during the 4th framework program. The first program Austria could take part after entered the European Union. During the 6th framework program, he was a national contact point for health program. Today, he will present the development of the reimbursement rules for internal invoice costs in Horizon Europe projects. In the same session, Per Inge will tell us what happened to in-kind contribution by third parties. He will indicate what key changes in these rules and what may in part explain these changes. Wolfram, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Maria. So thank you very much for your kind introduction, and also thank you, Per Inge, for this great overview over the novelties in the new framework program Horizon Europe. So I will go a little bit in detail into the internally invoiced goods and services and try to be as brief as possible. This cost category is for us as medical university of very, very high importance. So nearly all most of the projects we are performing here, both on international and national levels, include some of those internally invoiced costs. And it was a long way from the beginning of Horizon 2020 to the status we have now in Horizon Europe. So at the beginning of H2020, the system of those internally invoiced costs was changed completely. So the Commission introduced the reimbursement of those costs under the normal cost categories. So we had to calculate, for example, our animal house. All the staff there had now to fill their timesheets, and every single piece of feed stuff and whatever had to be calculated under the respective cost category. For example, for example, the other cost category. So this system then made it close to impossible for us to calculate or to get those costs, those internal invoice costs reimbursable for our university, as no staff in, for example, the animal house would keep their time sheets for each project they are involved in. So yeah, for the first years of H2020, we could not get reimbursed our internally invoiced costs. So it was a lot of organizations then tried to convince the Commission to change the system. For example, the European University Association and other organizations. And finally, they were successful. And from beginning of 2017, so mid of the last framework program, they recognized that this system was a huge problem for our universities and changed the philosophy completely. So from this time on, our internal invoice cost could be reimbursed on the basis of unit costs, according to the usual accounting practices of the organizations. Of course, those accounting practices must have been consistent for all sources of funding. So that was not possible to have our own system for the European project. So the the accounting practices have been applied for national funding, for regional funding, as well as for the European fundings. Those costs and the unit costs, and also the numbers of the units used in the project, had to be recorded in the beneficiaries' accounts, and of course did not include any costs which were not included in other, which have been included in other budget categories. For example, again, personnel costs. So you cannot use the same personnel costs for the internal invoices and as well as for the normal project budget. And those costs also had been possibly adjusted by the beneficiary on the basis of budgeted or estimated elements. But again, those adjustments have to be objective and verifiable by the beneficiary. And those unit costs also excluded, of course, items which were not directly linked to the production of those services or to the provision of those services and goods. So now the situation in the Horizon Europe, in the new framework program, as Per Inge already mentioned, those costs are defined in the Article 6, and the cost category is the category D2. And in my opinion, the definitions in the new model grant agreement are even more clear than they have been in the H2020 MGA. Okay,
Wolfram, just to remind you, you have less than 2 minutes.
Okay. So then I skipped very fast.
To remember. Yeah, thanks.
The costs again have to be recorded in the beneficiary accounts, and again they will use the usual accounting practices for those costs. And these costs need, of course, also be directly connected to the project. So I try to go quickly about it. So what kind of costs we have here? So we have, of course, self-produced consumables, then specific research devices, research facilities, which is the most important point in our university, and also premises for hosting the research specimens, like our animal house, greenhouse, aquarium, and so on. They must be directly connected to the project. This is the important point. They must be well documented, both for the direct and the indirect costs of those services. And again, we have to use this methodology for all projects we have consistently. And as Beringe already mentioned, it's also possible to be applied in the ERC grants, both for the regular and the additional funding. But they are not applicable for other projects using unit costs like the transnational access to research infrastructure or the virtual access to research infrastructures if they are available in the call. And this is the good news. Usually by using the actual direct costs, indirect costs, you get higher reimbursement rates than the 25% which used to be used now. So this I go just quickly what we are for what we are using those costs. So this is mainly our animal house, but also our core facilities, which can be accessed by all of our researchers within our university. And finally, just to conclude, take-home messages. The most important point is it must be well documented, and we are at the moment in the process to document our system and recalculate them according to the actual indirect costs, which can be used for now. It must be evidence of the amount of the unit cost, of the price of the unit cost, as well as the amount of units used in the project. The beneficiary usual practice is much stronger accepted by the Commission now, based on a new philosophy of trust. And this is for us at the moment, it's an effort now. We have to do it newly for our calculation of our core facilities, that the 25% lump sum for the indirect costs cannot be included anymore, but we expect to get higher reimbursement rates by using our actual indirect costs. So I had to be very quick. So this is now the last slide.
Thank you. But first, we should have a floor to Beringe for his presentation, and we will answer a question at the end. Beringe, you have maximum 10 minutes. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Wolfram, for your presentation. What was known under the name in-kind contributions by third parties in Horizon 2020 now, to one extent, is a different animal. Sorry, pardon the pun, in HorizonEurope. So we'll briefly look at what happened to it in HorizonEurope. Just a brief reminder, we'll probably skip that. What was the definition in Horizon 2020? Look at changes in definitions and terminology and rules, and how to budget and report these costs now. A couple of issues that, as far as I can see, are at the moment unclear in the guidelines. In Horizon 2020, we had in the matrix to the left, we have two dimensions which were relevant for income contributions by third parties. We had two articles, one which concerned income contributions free of charge, and one was against payment. And we also had to distinguish whether between whether they were used in the fisheries premises or not. In HorizonEurope, when you look at the terminology, it looks quite different. at the outset, at first glance, it looks like it's only relevant in one box in that matrix, which is free of charge and used on the beneficiary premises. For all the other boxes in that matrix, there is a question mark at first glance. So briefly, in Horizon 2020, we had the two articles in grant agreement, free of charge and against payment. We had also a column in the budget table and in the financial statement called additional information for indirect costs, the cost for in-kind contributions not used on the premises. And the purpose of that was to correct the calculation of, to deduct that number from the calculation of indirect cost. In Horizon Europe, in Article 2 of the Model Grant Agreement, there is a set of definitions. One term that's defined there is in-kind contributions, and it's now called in-kind contributions with the meaning of Article 2, bracket 36 of the EU Financial Regulation from 2018, i.e. non-financial resources made available free of charge by third parties. So actually this comes from the financial regulation, which was adopted in 2018, in August 2018, where it says in that same article, in-kind contribution means non-financial resources made available free of charge by third parties to a beneficiary. So what happens here is that the rules for Horizon Europe are now aligned with the financial regulation. The financial regulation, by the way, is sort of the basic financial rules of everything within the EU, briefly summarized. So what about what was called in-kind contributions against payment in Horizon 2020? Well, they're still eligible for funding, but they're not called in-kind contributions anymore. That is sort of how to summarize it. In Horizon Europe, you don't have separate articles about in-kind contributions in the Model Grant Agreement anymore. But within two articles, there is some text about in-kind contributions. And remember, this is only free of charge we're talking about. So in Article 6, which is about eligible costs, in Article 6.1, there is more text than this, but I'm just highlighting one key term, part of that text is text, which says, provided that they concern only direct costs. In Horizon 2020, that could be different. And in Article 9.2, it says, other third parties may give in-kind contributions to the action, i.e. personnel, equipment, other goods and work and services, etc., which are free of charge if necessary for the implementation. In the budget table, you don't find anything about in-kind contributions anywhere, basically. So the key terminology that we're left with here is, first of all, the term in-kind contributions by third party, which now means free of charge. The other is the term seconded persons, which you will find in the budget table for the grant.
Okay, Beringa, you have 2 minutes more.
Okay, thanks. Seconded persons is for personnel provided by third parties against payment. So it's only if it's against payment you use that category, seconded persons. So again, all the costs, all the non-financial contributions by third party, whether it's free of charge, i.e. in kind, or against payment, they may be eligible, but only as measured by the direct costs for the third party. And then you get 25% of indirect costs on top of that. So it's no longer deducted from the calculation of the indirect costs with the 25% rate. So basically, how do you budget it? If it's in kind, i.e. free of charge, you just use the same categories that you would use, the same cost categories that you would use as if they were your own. If they're against payment, as I said, personnel goes under seconded persons, everything else goes under the quote-unquote normal cost categories. For reporting, the same thing applies, but keep in mind that you also only report the cost as they were measured as direct costs for the third party, and then you calculate in the costs on top of that. There is no guidance that I can find yet which says, can you indicate anywhere in your report that you had in-kind contributions to your charge? So what's unclear at the moment, first of all, is whether this would have to be, if it's provided free of charge and you report them as costs, do you also have to report them as revenue? Revenue is what's called the receipts in Horizon 2020, i.e. income generated by the action. That's unclear at the moment. And the other, one other thing that's still unclear is whether these contributions by third parties will only be eligible if they're used on the premises of the beneficiary, because this is linked to the fact that you get indirect costs on top. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you, Per Inge, a lot for this presentation. We have one question in the chat box from Stashka Mrakiamnik, who has verified the calculation of indirect costs. This is a question for Wolfram.
Yes, thank you for this question. As I said, the most important thing, or the most important aspect in this field, is that you have a very, very precise and good documentation how you calculate both your indirect and direct costs. And then, of course, you need them for the calculation of your project budget. In our case, this is done by the financial department of our university in cooperation with the different core facilities we have. And then, of course, it will be controlled and checked by during the possible audit you will have if you are over the threshold. Of course, the auditor will take your documentation, check them, and verify them if they are valid.
Okay, thank you very much for presentation and for questions. We have one question more. Do you have an example for third-party personnel costs free of charge? I think that this is for Per Inge.
Depends on what you mean by example. I think there is an example mentioned in one of the e-documents I read somewhere where for certain public entities, you have an arrangement where salaries for personnel are paid not by the legal entity, which is a beneficiary in the grant agreement, but by public authorities. That is mentioned as one example somewhere in the EU documents.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation and questions as well. We have to stop here and go forward in details about the novelty in Horizon Europe program and its importance when budgeting application for Horizon Europe. In the following session, our panelists and presenters will be Maddalena Tognola, Primož Petek, and Barbara Doric. Maddalena Tognola is head of the grant office at the University of Bern in Switzerland. She has been in research management for almost 20 years and is a member of both EARMA and BESTPRAC, of course, in BESTPRAC in WG2 finance. Primož Petek is involved with research management and administration since 2011, when he joined Public Research Institute in Slovenia, Slovenian Forestry Institute. His work there is linked with finance, accounting, EU-funded projects, and other related areas of work. As a member of both network, BESTPRAC and EARMA, he is active in a different administration project where he develops RMI-related topics. Barbara Doric is involved with RMI since 2001. She's working at Faculty of Mathematics and Physics, University of Ljubljana, Slovenia, as head of a Research and Development Office since 2019. She is involved in RMI pre-award and post-award project, BESTPRAC member since 2018. Today, panelists will speak on two financial aspects of Horizon Europe that should be considered earlier when preparing the budget. Reduce the net amount for management and overheads in Maria Skłodowska-Curie doctoral networks, and clarifications regarding purchase of equipment. Madalena, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Maria. I feel like the Eurovision Song Contest now. Bern calling and sending 12 points to Norway and to Austria.
Yes, that's it. I feel the same.
Dear colleagues, I will have a very brief input regarding changes in the Marie Skłodowska-Curie doctoral networks, which were formerly called the ITNs, the Innovative Training Networks. What's the issue? The Commission had too many applications of ITNs and decided to fund more by reducing the cost of each project. And how to reduce the cost of each project? They reduced the maximum number of fellows, of PhD students that can be employed in the normal Horizon Europe doctoral networks. I'm talking here especially about the normal doctorates, not industrial and not the joint. So we had up to 15 PhD students in Horizon 2020. As you know, there is a payment per unit, so per month, where one of the PhD students is employed. So we had 540 units, and now we have a maximum of 360 units. That means 10 PhD students in Horizon Europe doctoral networks. What does it mean in terms of budget? So first of all, there is also a reduction in the amount for the research and training cost for €200 per month. A smaller amount and less fellows, it means that the budget for research and training is going down. So if you think of research intensive doctorates networks, molecular biology, for example, and then also creating trainings for everyone, now the budget is going down. It's 60% of what it used to be. So you might end up having less budget to hire external trainers. You have to find a way to reduce the cost of summer schools. Yes, and well, if you took reserves to pay the PhD students, you have a bit less here. In the former BESTPRAC in the project, we had our financial guidelines from 2017, where we recommended a split of the budget that was for overhead and management into two halves, to say, okay, with one half, you can give it to the institutions as overhead, and the other half would be centralized to fund the management of the project. So actually our jobs and our colleagues' jobs. Well, this recommendation might have to be reviewed in Horizon Europe because there is less in general. The amount per se remains the same. It's still 1,200, but since the amount of fellows is going down, we end up with €432,000 for the whole project instead of 648. And so if we split it, and this is the slide where you can see the figure, you end up per year. So the amount that is available divided by 4, if we split it 50%, of €54,000 for management per year of a doctorate network. And this calls for me to a reconsideration of what can be done in terms of management and how to split the amounts. And this is it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Madalena, a lot for a brief presentation. Primož and Barbara, floor is yours.
Okay, hello everyone. We are happy to present an interesting topic called Equipment in Horizon Europe. My name is Primož Petek, and I'm coming from Slovenian Forestry Institute. My co-presenter and colleague, Barbara Doric, is coming from University of Ljubljana, Faculty of Mathematics and Physics. Before I hand over the stage to my colleague, I would underline that this presentation is made on the basis of available Horizon Europe information, Also, main Horizon 2020 guidelines were taken into consideration for preparing this overview. Now, please, let's hear Barbara's insights.
Dear colleagues, welcome to our equipment BESTPRAC slides. I would like to talk about equipment. When we are talking about equipment, this is one of the cost categories of the HorizonEurope project. And this cost category of equipment includes, you can buy equipment new for the project. You can use equipment that was bought before the project started, but you have to be aware that it's not yet fully depreciated. You can also use infrastructure if it's foreseen in the call, or you can use other assets where applicable. Next slide, please. What are the eligible equipment? What is the eligible equipment? Equipment was foreseen in the application. If there are any changes regarding this equipment, you should contact your coordinator or project officer. Equipment can be charged on the project directly, but if it's your usual practice to consider some durable equipment as overheads, you should cover them from your 25% rate of indirect costs. Next slide, please. What are the eligible equipment costs? As said, the equipment is eligible if it was foreseen in the project application. You should follow best value for money principle. Sometimes it is appropriate to follow the lowest price. Equipment costs may also include the cost necessary to ensure that the asset is in good health, that you can use it as you would like to use it. So these costs are also eligible. So are the costs related to duties and taxes, such as non-deductible value-added tax. Next slide, please. We have some different available options how to charge equipment to the project. Depreciation costs are by default eligible. If foreseen, you can by exception use full cost. You can also use renting or leasing of equipment or cost of equipment infrastructure contributed in kind against payment. Next slide, please. Depreciation is a method of the accounting method, and it means that you can you will charge the equipment cost to the project over its useful life. So you cannot charge an equipment to the project in 1 year if you can use the equipment over a few years.
Barbara, sorry for interruption. Can you go to change in the presentation mode, your presentation, because of better visibility?
Sorry, where?
It is not a presentation mode.
Yeah, I think it's
Just
plus F5.
Sorry.
Can you do that?
Is everything okay?
Now it's great. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. I wasn't looking at myself, so I. Okay. Can you go for on, Primoz, please?
Okay.
We have some regularities for the depreciation. This must be actually incurred costs. As said, it must be your usual accounting practice. You can only charge a portion of depreciation. It means the portion of the rate as of your actual use. This is only eligible. You can only charge the costs incurred during the project, not before, not after the project. Depreciation cannot be higher than the purchase cost of the equipment. The cost of renting or leasing equipment is also eligible, but it must not exceed the usual depreciation costs. Also be aware that you should have some supporting documentation for the use of the equipment. Usually we have the equipment usage log. Also, you can have timesheets for the equipment, and be aware that the use of equipment consists with the project staff working on the project.
I have to remind you that you have 2 minutes more for presentations.
Okay.
Because we received the questions, I want to discuss it.
Primož, it's your word.
Okay, Barbara, thanks. Regarding full cost option, we have to be attentive that the fact that the purchase of equipment, infrastructure, other assets are specifically bought for the action. Further on, such purchase should be recorded as a fixed asset, and also full cost of rendering are eligible. Then we have 2 hybrid options. First is such where depreciation costs are primarily foreseen and full cost option is added. And then we have second hybrid option where full cost option is primarily foreseen and depreciation option is added. We have also an option where equipment purchase outlay is only partially capitalized. That means only a part of it is recognized as an asset. In this case, capitalized portion may be considered within equipment cost category. This is of course possible if full cost option is available. And of course, the expense portion may be considered within purchase cost category. Of course, expenditures are recognized in acquiring period. An omnipresent question may arise here, and that is, can accounting treatment dictate financial reporting? By our opinion, this may be the case in certain circumstances, although we do not think that this should be the case. And then at the end, we're left with special features that are linked with equipment costs. There could be a case where an asset that we acquired for a project is after project completion or completion of a work package sold on a market. In such case, we would expose a prescription which says that equipment costs are eligible only if used for the action. Consequently, proceeds of such sale should lower equipment eligible costs. Then we have equipment maintenance costs. We should be aware that maintenance costs are linked with usage of equipment. That means, let's say, cleaning, calibrating, testing, and so on. And we should foresee this cost already at budget preparation phase. Currently, there are no large research infrastructure mentioning, and also no full capacity filter that could be mentioned in existing HorizonEurope documents. And for wrap-up, we have low-value assets. These should be recorded as cost within beneficiary business years, but of course, accepted accounting principles should be taken into consideration. So thank you for your attention. Now, if there are any unanswered questions, please do ask.
Great. We have a few questions in the chat. First, can we consider purchasing a book of books as equipment following our institutional rules?
Well, I would say that you have to consider, you have to check if it is to do your project as you've write the application. So it's not only your usual practice, but also you have to consider what you write in the application. So it's not a yes or a no question. I think you should consider what are the books for the project, or, you know.
Okay, thank you, Barbara. What are the exceptions to be able to claim the full costs of an equipment? Can you share example, please?
Maybe I can try to answer this question. Well, of course, full cost, I think, okay, first, one thing we've maybe forgot to mention is that you have to, of course, make some close list before you go into this story. And of course, you have to have some logs or some evidence, you know, that these costs will be properly claimed. So I think if it's full cost option, if it is allowed, then I think you need proper evidence that you use it only for this project, you know. So I hope I quickly managed to answer the question. Otherwise, I can do some additions.
Okay, I cannot find any more questions in the chat. Thank you very much on your presentations. Now we are moving on our last but not least session for today. In this session, Per Inge Andersson will discuss how to approach in calculation of the personnel costs during the budgeting for proposal in the first calls under HorizonEurope program in view of current available informations. Together with him, our colleague Elena Ioannidou will give an overview of the main features and provisions of the personnel costs under HorizonEurope Cooperative Grant Agreement. Also, the main differences from Horizon 2020 to HorizonEurope will be presented, emphasizing the simplification of calculations. Elena Ioannidou has more than 15 years experience in managing and administration of research grants, both national and international, including European funding grants. In 2004, she was assigned to set up the research office of the Cyprus Institute of Neurology and Genetics, and since then she runs it. Today, she provides her expertise from the pre-aware to post-aware stage, and for the last 5 years is also offering advice supporting the protection and exploitation of intellectual property rights. Elena and Per Inge, floor is yours.
Good morning to all the participants, and thank you for being here and have the patience with us. This is a snapshot of Horizon 2020 and how we calculate the personnel cost under Horizon 2020. As you can see, we had a lot of calculations, a lot of options on the actual productive hours, and so that the Commission decided that it needed to move forward and change that, so they incorporated the corporate approach where they attempted to simplify and harmonize everything under Horizon Europe. Can we move forward, please? The next slide. Okay, the main difference now is that the concept of the annual productive hours is discontinued, as well as the last closed financial year in our calculations and the hourly rates. And so what is adapted? Can you please, okay. So now we will follow the current calendar year that will be implemented, the daily rate approach across all programs of Horizon 2020, and so the formula will be easier and reduce all the errors and administrative burden. Next slide, please. Now, as I told you, the Commission adopted in June 2020 the corporate model grant agreement across all funding programs. Of course, certain options are available to be adapted to each program according to the specific rules of each program, and the daily approach will be followed across all programs. Next slide, please. The objective of the corporate model grant agreement was to harmonize and standardize everything in all programs, consistent interpretation in all programs, and the integration of program specificities through the specific annexes and rules to be applied for the specific projects. Next slide, please. Now, how to calculate personnel cost? the formula is simple. You multiply the daily rate by the days worked on the project, rounded up or down to the nearest half day. Next slide, please. How to calculate the daily rate now? It's the formula. It's the actual personnel cost of the specific person divided by 215 days. The 250 days is fixed across all projects. So you will be using that magic figure across all your projects. The actual personnel cost for the period include social security contribution, taxes, other costs linked to the remuneration, and if they arise from national law or the employment contract agreement. Now, you calculate per calendar year, and the calendar year starts from January until December each year, except for the months that are running for the end of the period until the calendar year closes. So for that you use a proportionate. You divide the 215 days by 12, multiplied by the months that your reporting period ends. I have an example in the next slide that you can see. Next slide, please. So we have a researcher that the reporting period started September 2021 and the reporting period ends March 2023. For 2021, we have the actual personnel cost divided by 215 times the days worked for the period from September 2021. For 2022, we have the whole period, and for 2023, we have the actual personnel cost divided by the 215 divided by 12 times 35, which is the days that he worked for the specific project. As I mentioned, HorizonEurope follows the calendar year with regards to personnel cost, so no longer the last closed financial year applies. Your project year might not necessarily follow the calendar year. However, when you are reporting, you will most likely end somewhere during the calendar year. So you have an example here how it is easily calculated. And this is what you are going to include in your reporting period for the Commission. Now, how you calculate, next slide please, how you calculate the days worked. You need to use reliable time recording like timesheets, either on paper or on a computer based if your organization has that. Or you can sign a monthly declaration on days spent for the specific action. The template is not yet available on the Commission, but it's something that they are working on, and soon they said it will be available on the website.
Okay, I have to remind you, you have less than 2 minutes.
Yes.
I need time for praise, and we get interesting question in chat box.
I know. The time recording system in hours, you have 3 options. Either a conversion based on the average number of hours that the person must work per working day according to his or her contract, or a conversion based on the usual standard annual productive hours, or you use a fixed number of hours rounded to 8 hours per day. I have examples on each of the options available, so we can move to the next slide, which is a minor change from Horizon 2020. The additional remuneration, it's discontinued. Now it's replaced with a project-based remuneration. The it's a usual remuneration of a legal entity under which the person receives supplementary payments for work done on specific project. This must be the usual practices of the organization. So it's how it must be declared. It's actual remuneration cost times the worked, the time worked for the specific person on end. It has a slight limitations on how it is applied, as it has to be on national regulations. So there is a lot to be seen, and specific on the model, annotated model grant agreement, a lot will be explained there. I have some further examples how to calculate the project-based remuneration and the fallback option. And so you will see it in your, when you receive the presentations. I pass on the floor to Peringe so that he can continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elena. I received some comment through the chat that the sound quality wasn't too good during my previous presentations. I'm trying a headset now. Could anyone let me know if this works better?
Yes, it's a better. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. Well, thanks for telling me. So I don't want this to be affected by the sound quality. Maria, are you seeing the correct window now for my presentation?
Yes.
Great, thanks. Okay, so how to budget personnel costs then in light of the changes that Elena has explained. First of all, in the grant agreement budget, as opposed to the proposal template budget, you actually have subcategories of personnel costs. And these are summarized here in a different layout than from what you have in the grant agreement. As again, when you submit the budget for the proposal, you just have one column saying personnel costs. But actually, you do have various subcategories, and in the grant agreement, they are relevant. And I'm summarizing those here. Just linking back to one of the earlier presentations, seconded persons means persons that are contributed by a third party against payment. SMEs may actually have a combination of SME owner, which is a unit cost based calculation, as well as any of the other categories. Just to keep that in mind, that if you have an SME and they declare costs based on the unit cost for SME owners that don't receive a salary, they may also have costs in the other personnel categories. The changes from Horizon 2020 to HorizonEurope, what do they mean for budgeting? I would argue that the switch from hourly rates to daily rates do not have a significant impact when you budget for the proposal. Most entities, when they participate in the framework program, and most consortia, they plan not on an hourly basis, and they don't plan on a daily basis. They plan in terms of person months. And I would argue that when you estimate the cost per person month a few years into the future, it doesn't matter whether you have to report later on based on hours or days. I'd be interested to hear if anyone disagrees with me, but that is, and there may be exceptions, but I think for most of us, it doesn't really matter when you budget for the proposal. The other thing that does matter is the rules on project-based remuneration. So for those that use that, or for whom it is relevant, keep in mind the rules and the ceiling, the rule that says that you have to use the lower of the so-called action daily rate, or on the one side, or the national project's daily rate on the other. So that does have an impact on the budget. So when you are a beneficiary and you're going to calculate your personnel costs for a proposal for HorizonEurope, what should you think of? First of all, you should assess whether your organization qualifies for using the actual cost option or the unit cost option. Unit cost means the same cost for a category of personnel, basically. The other thing that you should think about is whether you would use any personnel that go under the category natural person under direct contract or seconded person. And as I said earlier, if you are an SME, keep in mind that you could have a combination of an SME owner who does not receive a salary and works on the project, which might be reimbursed on the unit cost basis, as well as the other personnel categories.
We have 3 minutes more until the end of this session. You have 1 minute for conclusion, please.
Yeah. So use a consistent methodology to include a realistic estimate of salary increases as long as the project lasts. And if you're a non-Euro country, also use a realistic estimate for exchange rates during the implementation period. As a coordinator, I would suggest that you should collect from your partners when you in the proposal stage the information as to which of those personnel categories their costs are for, and that is based on the tip that was issued for applicants for the ERC Pathfinder open call last month, which said that for the grant preparation stage you need to have a clear track of which of those categories the personnel costs belong to for all of the partners in the consortia. This is, you can look at it later, a suggestion of how to approach developing your own budget tools, depending on how many proposals you expect to submit and how many different work programs and calls you expect to submit proposals for. As I said, I think we'll just end there.
Okay, Peringa, I'm so sorry, I have to stop you here because we should try to answer at least 1 or 2 questions from chat box. For example, yes, first question is how, do we have to make timesheets instead of declaration on a person's work exclusively on Horizon 2020 action when a postdoc 100% fully hired for the project is on a sick leave during the few days, weeks or months?
It is better to keep timesheets or a declaration, whatever. The Commission allows both of them. So in case of an audit, you need to substantiate the time that the person has worked on the specific project. Because it happened to us under Horizon 2020, it is better to have either a declaration or timesheet, even for the people that are working full-time on a specific project.
Okay, thank you, Elena, very much for answer.
There was a mistake there was a typo on my slides. I will correct it, and the slides that will be disseminated will be corrected. Sorry about that.
Okay, thank you very much for all excellent presentation and discussions. We will have additional time to discuss financial rules tomorrow during the meeting. And after the formal of the end of this meeting, I completely agree with your comments that this topic personnel costs in Horizon is very important, but this session is just a brief overview about the main changes. We will have 1 additional session tomorrow morning. And as I mentioned, after the event, we will have the additional time for discussion, all unanswered questions from finance. It is a very last session, and in this session, we wish to get feedback from all of you about this event. Hopefully, we will have a time for discussion about position of finance in the future development of research management and administration as profession. Now we have to move on a plenary link to hear what my colleague wants to say as closer remarks. We will take all your questions from chat, and as I say at the beginning, try to answer during the event or after the events in writing. Thank you, and see you tomorrow morning again.